Doc's place. Glad you're here to join me once again. And I've got something to talk about that's one of my personal pet peeves, and that is language. You know, I love language. I've studied language extensively. Certainly, I'm not a Rhodes Scholar. I'm not an etymologist who has studied with a PhD word origins. But I am concerned once again about language as a colonizing tool. I've made reference to that previously in other episodes, and in this particular case, it's even more significant to me personally. Word origins, they impact us a lot in our everyday life. Take, for instance, a simple word like sincere. A lot of people aren't really knowledgeable or cognizant about the origins of the word sincere, but I think you'll find it, quite enlightening. The word sincere is actually a word that comes to us from Rome, and of course it's Latin in origin. Back in ancient Rome, one of the big professions was that of being a sculptor. And sculptors oftentimes made mistakes in their work. And in the course of their work, they would maybe perhaps crack a pedestal, crack a statue. And one of the things that they did in order to repair that little flaw in their work would be to simply take some of the shavings, some of the dust, and they would mix it into the crack with wax. And then they would simply put back the granite or the marble in there and smooth it out. And this became a common practice among sculptors. Now, the Latin word for wax was cere, C-E-R-A, cere. And the Latin word for without was sine. So oftentimes, those who purchased statues, pedestals, whatever artwork they wanted to buy, would ask the sculptor, was this particular work without flaw? Was it without wax? But in Latin, they would say, is this sine cere, sine cere? And sine cere, as became anglicized, became known to us as the word sincere. Is it sincere? Is it without hidden flaw? Is it without wax? And that's the origin of our simple word sincere. But we have other words also that we've come to embrace in the English language, once again, that we have no etymological detail for or no knowledge of. Words like nigger, the N-word.
Now this nigger here.
And I love the word nigger. I do. I know it's forbidden fruit. I know it's taboo, but I love the word nigger. And that's because I know the word origin of the word nigger. In the days of the Prophet Muhammad, may Allah be pleased with him, when he was being persecuted by the Quraysh in Mecca, he told his new converts and followers that they should flee to Abyssinia, which we now know as Ethiopia. He told them to go to Abyssinia because it was a Christian country, and there they would find protection. And so his followers took the advice of the Prophet Muhammad and went to Abyssinia. But unfortunately, they were pursued by the Quraysh, and the Quraysh went into Abyssinia seeking to capture those converts and bring them back to Mecca for punishment. However, they weren't able to just effectively go into Abyssinia and grab those converts and take them back to Mecca, because they had to deal with the ruler of Abyssinia. And by coincidence, the ruler of Abyssinia was known by the name of the Negus. The Negus. He was the ruler, he was the emperor, he was the word supreme, and he was called the Negus. And so when the Quraysh came in, they were told that in order to address the issue, they must first address the Negus. And this was a title of royalty. This was a title of honor. This is what they found. And that word, as often is done, was later anglicized and corrupted. I'll bring you back more of that right after this commercial message.
Negus.
Negus. What is the language of origin?
Ethiopian to Amharic.
What is the definition?
A king. It's used as a title of the sovereign of Ethiopia. Negus.
Negus. Could you use it in a sentence?
The Negus ruled Ethiopia until the coup of 1974.
Negus.
This is
Negus.
And would you say the word loudly for the judges?
Negus.
One more time?
Negus.
Negus.
Negus. Negus. Negus. Negus.
Absolutely stunned, but he'll take it.
Welcome back to Dr. Place. As I was saying before the commercial break, the Negus, he was the royal and imperial head in Abyssinia. Now that's a great and grand title. But as often happens, as often the case, language is corrupted and is infused with various meanings. By the time the British and other Anglicans came in, the word Negus had come to mean not just the royal emperor, but it meant any dark-skinned people, any people of color that were found in the area. And no longer were they called the Negus, they were simply Negus, Negus. Very similar to the phrase that the young hip-hop generation uses today. They became the Negus. We ended up with the Niger River. We ended up with Nigeria. But all of those came from the root word of the Negus, which was a royal and imperial title for black people in Africa. That's what it was. So today, when I hear the word nigger, being fully aware of the root, being fully aware of its origin, I am not offended. As a matter of fact, I find myself kind of delighted that those who would attempt to use it in a derogatory term have no knowledge of the fact that indeed it is a term of endearment and of royalty. That's where the word nigger comes from, negus. So the next time someone calls you a nigger, I would suggest you say thank you for honoring my royal heritage. That's how I feel about that particular word. Now, going a little bit further, there's another word that I find being thrown about all the time. I hear it so very frequently, the word Uncle Tom. Uncle Tom. Oh, he's an Uncle Tom. Oh, she's an Uncle Tom. But my reality is, what do you really know about Uncle Tom? Because if you really knew about Uncle Tom, I just don't think that you would throw that word about the way you do. Because the reality is, Uncle Tom was based upon a man who was heroic, who was brave, who was an entrepreneur, who actually stood up and did what he could to fight against slavery back during the 19th century, back during the 1800s. And that man is one Reverend Josiah Henson. Josiah Henson was born June 15, 1789. And he was born in Maryland, as a matter of fact, Charles County. And he was born into slavery. As a matter of fact, Josiah Henson was sold 3 times before he was at the age of 18. And he labored as a child slave, no question about it. However, by the time Mr. Henson was in his 20s, he had accomplished a lot. He had been befriended by a Methodist minister, and he had learned about the gospel, and he had learned to preach the gospel. And as a result of his preaching, his master allowed him to go about the countryside, preaching to other slaves. And he was able to amass a few dollars. It's certainly at least enough to strike up a bargain with his master that would allow him to buy the freedom of himself, his wife, and his kids. And they agreed upon a price of $350. Over a period of time, Josiah Henson was able to raise that amount of money. And when he went to his master to offer him $350 to buy his freedom, his master reneged on the deal. He says, no, it's $1,000, $1,000. And at that point in time, Josiah Henson made a fateful decision. He decided, you know what? There's only one way for me. I've got to get away from these mean white people. I've got to go north to Canada to freedom. And so Josiah Henson developed a plan, and he worked very hard on his plan to escape to freedom in Canada. He knew that he had to take his wife, he had to take his kids, and he had 4, and he managed to practice carrying his kids on his back. He walked around the plantation with the sack that he had his wife construct for him so that he could practice carrying his 2 sons on his back. Ultimately, Josiah Henson, his wife and kids, did escape from Kentucky to Canada, carrying his 2 kids on his back, traveling by foot, they traveled through Ohio, Indiana, further north up to Upper Canada, and settled in Don. They created a colony and a settlement for other slaves. Now, Josiah Henson was a man who was also very industrious. He had found a little shack up there that had been really nothing more than just an abandoned shack, and he turned that into a pseudo school of sorts, where he taught other slaves who had escaped north various skills. One of the skills he taught them was about lumbering, working with wood. As a direct result of that effort, miraculous things were accomplished. And I'll tell you a little more about that right after this commercial break. Hi, welcome back to Doc's Place. As I was saying before the break, Josiah Henson, being the entrepreneur that he was, taught these other slaves who helped him found the colony various trades, and one of those was lumberjacking. He taught them about how to make things out of wood, and more importantly, how to produce a fine wood product, a black walnut wood, which everyone was duly impressed with. So impressed that Queen Victoria herself invited him to the World's Fair, in 1849. And at that point, he went to the World's Fair, displaying this black walnut wood, which was an instant hit, an instant sensation. As a result of monies that he made from that venture, he was able to pour money into the school and begin to expand the school. And in the meantime, he also made numerous trips back down south to conduct other slaves on the Underground Railroad, leading them to freedom back in Upper Canada. And I tell you what, it took a lot of bravery. It took a lot of guts. And in the meantime, he also did one other thing, which was to add another turn to Josiah Henson's life. He published his autobiography. It was called The Life of Josiah Henson, formerly a slave. And here's where his story really takes a turn. Another budding author, Harriet Beecher Stowe, read his autobiography. She was so taken by the story of Reverend Josiah Henson that she wanted to meet him, which she did. Ultimately, when Harriet Beecher Stowe produced her seminal book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, which has been crediting with beginning to start the Civil War, she modeled her character Uncle Tom directly on Josiah Henson. Directly on Josiah Henson. Indeed, in the next two publishings of Josiah Henson's autobiography, Harriet Beecher Stowe actually wrote the foreword, in which she gives credit to Josiah Henson for being the prototype for her character, Uncle Tom. Unfortunately, the character of Uncle Tom in her book was the dutiful, master-bound slave who was subservient to his master. And blacks that could read, of course, embraced that stereotype of Uncle Tom. However, the truth of the matter is that Josiah Henson was a brave, entrepreneurial abolitionist who never failed to put his own people above his own comfort. Now, I'm sure many people have never even heard of Josiah Henson, and I'm not surprised, and I'm equally sure that there are many who have, especially those who have sprung from Henson's British American Institute Project, which is what his small school was ultimately called, the British American Institute Project. But that British American Institute Project became the foundation for what is now known as Wilberforce University. And Wilberforce is the oldest private African American university in our nation. In short, we really need to be careful about how we accept, embrace, and perpetuate negative words and language, especially if we don't know the source. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Language is a very, very, very effective colonizing tool. We have to be careful. Josiah Henson, the Uncle Tom, was a special man. And I, for one, would be very much honored to be called an Uncle Tom. My name is Doc, and that's my truth. Peace out.
That's my nigger.